When I was clearing out my late husband's woodworking shed last October, I found a tin box hidden beneath the floorboards under his workbench. It was wrapped in an old flannel shirt and taped shut with electrical tape. On the lid, written in my husband's careful printing, "For my wife. Read this alone. Do not tell our daughter." I stood there in the cold with sawdust on my sleeves and did not move for a long time. "Good day, everyone. It's Carol. Thank you for being here with me today. Please stay until the end and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I always love knowing how far these stories travel." My husband Arthur and I were married for 39 years. We met in the fall of 1981 at a curling club fundraiser in Guelph, Ontario. He brought a butter tart squares to the potluck that everyone thought came from a bakery. He had made them himself from his mother's recipe, though he didn't admit that until our second date. He was a quiet man, the kind who fixed things without being asked and never needed you to notice. He had been a pipe fitter for 26 years, then a supervisor. Then he retired and built furniture in the shed he put up himself at the back of our property. He made a rocking chair for every grandchild. There are 4 of them now. We raised our daughter here in the same house in Guelph. 3 bedrooms, a backyard maple that drops leaves for 2 months every autumn. A Tim Hortons loyalty card permanently in the cup holder of the car. An ordinary life. A good one. Arthur passed in February of last year from a stroke he never fully recovered from. He had been unwell for nearly a year and a half, and in the final months he knew the direction things were heading. He was not a man who spoke easily about emotions, but he had a way of showing you where you stood with him. He would squeeze your hand twice. He had been squeezing mine a lot those last weeks. Our daughter Teresa was 44 years old and lived 40 minutes away in Cambridge with her husband Marcus. They had been married for 11 years. Teresa had been sweet as a girl, genuinely, deeply sweet. The kind of child who wrote thank you notes without being prompted and saved her allowance to buy birthday gifts for her friends. Somewhere in her late 30s, after Marcus came into the picture, something had shifted in a way I spent years telling myself I was imagining. Marcus worked in commercial real estate. He had opinions about money the way some people have opinions about religion, constant and confident and resistant to questioning. When Teresa had married him, I had tried hard to like him and mostly succeeded. He was not unkind to her. He was not unkind to me directly. He was the sort of man who treated generosity as a transaction and kept careful mental ledgers of what he was owed. In the months after Arthur's funeral, the calls from Teresa started coming differently. Not more often, but differently. There was an agenda underneath them, the way you can feel a current in water that looks still on the surface. She asked twice whether I had thought about the house, whether it was too much for one person to manage. She mentioned casually that Marcus knew a financial planner who worked with seniors navigating estate transitions. She offered to come help me go through Arthur's paperwork, and when I said I was managing fine on my own, there was a pause that lasted precisely 1 beat too long. I had been giving her the benefit of the doubt the way mothers do, which is to say, well past the point where doubt has any benefit left to give. And then I found the tin box under the floorboards. I did not open it in the shed. Something in me, some old instinct I couldn't have named, said not yet. I carried it inside under my arm, set it on the kitchen table, and made tea. I didn't drink. Then I sat down and opened the lid. Inside was a handwritten letter, 4 pages in Arthur's block print. Underneath it, a key with a tag and a folded piece of paper with a name and address. The key tag said, TD Bank, Branch 4417. The paper said, ask for Maureen Szabo. She's expecting you. Arthur had a safety deposit box I had never known about. I read the letter once. Then I read it again. Then I sat very still and listened to the furnace running and the sound of a car going past outside. And I thought, How long did you carry this by yourself? And then the colder thought, the one I couldn't push aside. What exactly were you protecting me from? I did not sleep that night. I lay on my side of the bed we had shared for 31 years in this house, staring at the ceiling, and I went through everything I thought I knew about our finances. We had a joint checking account, a TFSA each, an RRSP Arthur had converted to a RIF when he turned 71. A modest life insurance policy I had already filed. I thought I understood the full picture. Arthur had been careful and organized about money, the way he was careful and organized about everything. He paid the property taxes in advance. He kept receipts in labeled folders. He balanced his accounts by hand in a paper ledger he bought at Staples every January. But now there was a key on my nightstand. I got up at 4 a.m. and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Arthur's letter spread flat in front of me. He had started it, Dorothy. He only called me Dorothy when he was being serious. Always Carol to everyone else. Always love or sweetheart when it was just us. But Dorothy meant he needed me to pay attention. There are things I should have told you sooner, he had written. I was wrong to wait. I want you to understand that what is in this box belongs to you completely. Please speak to Maureen before you speak to anyone else, including Teresa, especially Marcus. I love you more than I have ever known how to say properly. I'm sorry I was never better at saying it. I hope this is enough. That last line. I hope this is enough. Arthur, who had built furniture with his hands for 40 years and never once asked for praise. Arthur, who had sat with me through my mother's decline, and the miscarriage we never talked about with anyone else, and the 2 years when Teresa had stopped speaking to us over something Marcus had convinced her to be angry about, that Arthur had needed to write. I hope this is enough told me something about the weight he had been carrying. It frightened me more than anything else in that letter. I thought about Teresa. I thought about the calls, the financial planner, the offers to help with paperwork. I thought about Christmas 2 years before when Marcus had made a comment at the table about how it made more sense for assets to transfer while a parent was still living. For tax purposes, he had said, smiling at Arthur over the turkey. Arthur had changed the subject without looking at me. He had known. He had been watching and knowing and carrying it alone for years. By 6 a.m, I had made 3 decisions. First, I would go to TD Bank alone. I would ask for Maureen Szabo by name, and I would not tell anyone I was going. Second, I would call my own lawyer. Her name was Janet Ferreira, and she had an office on Woolwich Street, and she had helped Arthur and me update our wills 6 years earlier. I trusted her completely, and I had been putting off calling her since the funeral, because I had assumed there was nothing complicated to sort through. That assumption was finished. Third, I would tell Teresa nothing. Not yet. I would be warm on the phone. I would be the grieving mother she expected. But I would not be open. Not until I understood what I was dealing with. Was that a form of dishonesty? Perhaps. But Arthur had kept something hidden for reasons I did not yet fully understand, and he had specifically asked me to keep it too. He had loved Teresa his whole life and still written especially Marcus. That told me what I needed to know. I dressed, put the key in my coat pocket, and sat down to wait for the bank to open. TD Bank Branch 4417 was on Stone Road, a quiet branch near the university. I arrived 5 minutes after 9. The woman at the desk looked up when I asked for Maureen Szabo, and her expression shifted slightly. The small adjustment of someone who has been told to expect a particular visitor. Maureen Szabo was perhaps 55, steady and warm in the specific way of someone who has spent decades managing other people's private matters without ever making them feel exposed. She shook my hand and brought me back to a small office. She closed the door. "Mrs. Fielding," she said, "I'm glad you came. Arthur said you might take a few months. He said you'd need time to be ready." "How long did you know him?" I asked. He opened the box 9 years ago. He came in once or twice a year. We'd have tea sometimes in the break room. She folded her hands. He talked about you every time. 9 years. I absorbed that. For 9 years, Arthur had made quiet trips to this branch on Stone Road, and I had not known. She led me to the vault and left me alone with the box. I had to sit down when I saw what was inside. There were 4 items. The first was a separate, longer letter addressed to me, not the one from the tin box. This one was 8 pages. I will not repeat all of it. Some of it belongs only to me. But the substance was this. Arthur had been quietly setting money aside since 2009. He had started after Marcus made his first significant attempt to borrow from us, which Arthur had refused and which Marcus had never forgiven him for. Arthur had watched over the years as Marcus reshaped Teresa's relationship to money, to family, to obligation. He had watched his daughter slowly reclassify her parents as assets to be managed rather than people to be loved. He had come to believe, slowly and with great pain, that if the full extent of what they had saved over a lifetime were known, it would not be safe, not in the hands of 2 people who had already begun to treat inheritance as a scheduled payment. He had not hidden it from me. He had hidden it from me, kept it invisible so it would be safe, to be revealed only when I would need it most. The second item was a bound notebook, hand-ruled in Arthur's printing, documenting a series of investments made through a discount brokerage account held in both our names. Index funds, a small number of GICs, a rental unit in a triplex in Hamilton that he had purchased with a friend in 2014 and bought out fully in 2019. Page after page of entries, each dated, each totaled. The final figure, written in pencil and circled, was $382,000. I read it 3 times. My hands were not steady. The third item was the deed to the Hamilton property, held in both our names, generating rental income that had been deposited into a separate bank account I had never seen. The statements showed a P.O. box address I didn't recognize. The fourth item was a small photograph of the 2 of us at Lake Louise from a trip we took in 2006. On the back, in Arthur's writing, "You always knew what mattered. Trust that." I sat in that vault room for a very long time. Then I photographed every document with my phone, replaced everything exactly as I had found it, locked the box, and returned to Maureen. I asked her to note in the bank records that I had sole access and to flag any attempt by any other party to access it. She nodded as though she had been expecting this request. I drove home on the 401 with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Guelph, I understood the full shape of what I was facing. It wasn't only grief anymore. It was a choice about the kind of woman I intended to be. That afternoon, Teresa called. Her voice had the studied lightness of someone trying not to sound impatient. She mentioned again that Marcus's financial planner contact was still available. She said she was just checking in, that she didn't want me overwhelmed dealing with Dad's things on my own. She said it with warmth so practiced it almost felt real. I told her I appreciated it. I kept my voice easy. I was already composing a text to Janet Ferreira before I put down the phone. Janet had a no-nonsense quality I had always appreciated. She wore flat shoes and kept 3 different kinds of tea in her office and got straight to the point without making you feel rushed. When I spread everything out on her desk the following afternoon, the photographs of the notebook, the deed, Arthur's letters, she read without interrupting. Then she sat back and was quiet for a moment in the particular way of someone sorting through implications. "Arthur was thorough," she said finally. "He was. Everything here transfers cleanly. The investment account is jointly held, so it passes to you directly outside of the estate. The property deed names you as joint tenant with right of survivorship. There's no ambiguity, Carol. He set this up carefully and legally. She tapped the photograph of the notebook. What you're describing with Teresa and Marcus isn't a legal threat yet, but it could become one if you're not organized and ahead of it. We spent 2.5 hours together that afternoon. By the end, I had a plan. Janet would handle the formal probate filing on all estate assets, including the previously undisclosed ones, fully documented. The Hamilton property would be independently appraised. The investment accounts would be consolidated under my sole management with a financial advisor Janet recommended, and we would create a clear record that I had obtained independent legal counsel and made all decisions freely and without interference. That last piece was the foundation. Everything else was built on top of it. Over the following 2 weeks, I moved through each step quietly. I met with the financial advisor, a composed woman named Beverly Tran, and reviewed every account. I signed documents at Janet's office. I had the Hamilton property assessed at $410,000. I did all of this while continuing to take Teresa's calls warmly, listening to her suggestions, saying nothing. It was Marcus who understood first. I should have expected that. He called on a Thursday evening, and his voice had changed. The courtesy was gone. He said he had heard from someone that I had been to TD Bank and met with a branch manager. He said he wanted to be clear that he and Teresa felt they had a right to be involved in major financial decisions. He used the phrase family matter 4 times. I kept my voice level. I told him that Arthur had left me as sole executor and that I was managing the estate with appropriate legal counsel. I told him that he and Teresa were welcome to review the probate filing when it became a public record. 12 minutes later, Teresa called. Her voice had the tight, thin quality it got when Marcus had been talking to her. She said I was being secretive. She said her father would have wanted her involved. She said she had rights as the only child. I'm still here, Teresa, I said quietly, and so is your father's will, which names me as sole beneficiary. You're welcome to verify that. A pause. Then she said something in a flat voice that did not sound like my daughter at all. We know there's more than what was filed, Mum. If you won't be reasonable about this, we're going to have to look at whether Dad was capable of making these decisions in the last few years. His health was declining. We have people who will say he wasn't himself. Capacity challenge. They were going to allege that Arthur had not been mentally competent. I felt cold. My voice did not change. Janet Ferreira is my solicitor. Her number is listed. Any communication from this point forward should go through her. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I will not pretend I wasn't afraid. There is a particular kind of fear that comes not from strangers, but from your own child's voice turned into something you don't recognize. It moved through me like cold water. But underneath the fear was something harder, Arthur's handwriting. I hope this is enough. He had been afraid too. He had done it anyway. I could do no less. Janet was unruffled when I called her that evening. A capacity challenge without medical evidence, she said, was very difficult to sustain. Arthur's GP and his neurologist had both conducted cognitive assessments in his final 18 months. Both had found him fully capable. She would prepare a comprehensive response. She advised me to document all contact from Teresa and Marcus going forward and not to respond directly to either of them again. I gave myself a few days. I drove to Stratford to stay with my friend Ruth, who had been widowed 4 years earlier, and who I knew understood certain things without being explained. We walked along the river. We ate well. I let myself be someone's friend for a few days instead of a widow under siege. When I came home, I was ready. The flowers arrived on a Monday. A large arrangement, lilies and white tulips, from a florist on Eramosa Road. The card read, "Mum, we love you. We overstepped. Can we talk?" T and M. I put them on the counter and looked at them for a while. They were very beautiful. That was the point. Teresa called that evening. Her voice was soft again, reconstructed carefully into warmth. She said they had been under so much pressure financially, that losing her dad had hit her harder than she had shown, that she was sorry. She asked if she could come for Sunday dinner. She said maybe they could find a way forward that worked for everyone. She said there was surely enough, that Dad wouldn't have wanted any of this conflict. Enough for the whole family. There it was. The flowers were a down payment on a different kind of conversation. I thanked her for the flowers. I said I needed more time. I kept my voice warm and unhurried. When I set the phone down, I felt something I hadn't expected. Stillness. Not the effortful stillness of someone working hard to hold themselves together, but the quieter kind. The kind that comes when you have stopped hoping the situation will resolve itself and have simply accepted that you are the one who will resolve it. I did not keep the flowers. I brought them to my neighbor across the street who had just had knee surgery and who I knew would enjoy them. That wasn't spite. I simply didn't want them in my house. That week, I called people. I called my friend Kathleen, who had been phoning every week since the funeral, and whom I had been deflecting with polite reassurances. I called my sister-in-law June, Arthur's younger sister, who had texted me twice asking if I was really all right. I called my pastor at Chalmers. I called my granddaughter's school friend's mother, which is a roundabout way of saying I called someone 20 years younger than me who had, for some reason, always made me feel capable of things. And I called my son-in-law's daughter from his first marriage. Her name was Paige. She was 27 and she lived in Vancouver. She had sent me a card after the funeral with a handwritten note that said, "I don't know what's happening, but if you need someone in your corner, I'm here." I had not called her because I didn't want to put her in the middle of anything, but her card had stayed in my mind. She answered on the second ring. We talked for almost an hour. She was careful, the way someone is careful when they are choosing words precisely rather than protecting themselves. She said there had been a lot of conversation in her father's house about Granddad Arthur's estate, and that she had not been comfortable with the direction of it. She said she was glad I had called. I didn't ask her to take sides. I asked her to stay in my life. She said, of course. The petition arrived at Janet's office on a Tuesday in April. Marcus and Teresa filed a formal application to the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, claiming that Arthur had experienced cognitive decline in the final 2 years of his life, and that the undisclosed assets had been accumulated while his capacity was impaired. They were seeking redistribution of the estate under intestacy rules, which would have directed a significant portion away from me. Janet called me before I had finished breakfast. She sounded the way she always sounded, precise and faintly satisfied, like someone watching a chess piece move exactly where she had expected it. "We're ready for this," she said. Her response filing was comprehensive. Arthur's GP had assessed his cognition 3 times in his final 2 years. His neurologist had conducted a full assessment 14 months before his death. Both found no impairment. Maureen Sabo at TD Bank provided a signed statement attesting that she had met with Arthur regularly over 9 years and had observed a man who was organized, deliberate, and entirely clear-minded at every visit. The investment notebook was included as an exhibit. 9 years of methodical, dated, internally consistent entries made as recently as 6 weeks before Arthur's death. The entries were cross-referenced, totaled, and compared to external statements. They were the work of a careful and capable mind. And then there was something else, something Janet had gathered quietly in the weeks before, which she showed me the morning before the hearing. Marcus, it emerged, had made a significant error In the early weeks of their campaign, before they had begun their approach to me, he had exchanged a series of emails with a business acquaintance discussing the strategy. In those emails, he had described the undisclosed assets as the upside we've been waiting for. He had described the mediation approach as a way to get her to agree before she fully lawyers up. And in one email, he had referred to me, in his own words, as the soft mark. I read those emails in Janet's office on a Tuesday morning in April, and I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph. Something quieter than that. The final small click of something becoming exactly what it had always been, now confirmed in writing. The hearing was at the Ontario Superior Court in Guelph. I dressed in navy, good slacks, the pearl earrings Arthur had given me for our 30th anniversary. I wanted to look like what I was, a competent woman who understood exactly what she was doing and had documentation to support every decision she had made. Marcus and Teresa were already seated when I arrived. Teresa looked at me when I walked in. For a moment, her face was unreadable, something moving through it I couldn't quite name. Then she looked down at the papers in front of her. Marcus did not look at me at all. Janet presented our case with quiet efficiency. She walked the judge through the medical records, through Maureen's statement, through the investment notebook, through the legal structure of each asset, and the clear survivorship provisions Arthur had put in place. She was methodical and unhurried. She introduced the emails toward the end of the presentation. That was when the hearing became disorderly. Teresa's lawyer asked for a recess. The judge granted 15 minutes. I watched Teresa and Marcus confer in low, rapid voices, Marcus's hands moving in tight gestures. Teresa was not looking at him. She was looking at her own hands on the table in front of her. She was sitting very still, the way someone sits when something inside them has stopped. I had sat that way myself in the shed, holding a tin box, before I understood what was in it. When the hearing resumed, the judge proceeded. Teresa took the stand briefly. Under cross-examination, Janet asked her to describe specific incidents she claimed demonstrated her father's confusion in his final years. She asked for dates. She asked for details. Teresa answered haltingly. She described her father seeming tired, seeming slower, forgetting a word sometimes. She described a man who was dying. She did not describe a man who was cognitively impaired. The distinction matters, and under careful questioning, it became clear that she understood the distinction herself. She had allowed Marcus to construct a legal argument on top of what were, in truth, the ordinary diminishments of a man in failing health. At one point, she said quietly, almost to herself, he just wasn't the same in those last months. Janet said gently, "Did you discuss your concerns about your father's capacity with any of his physicians while he was alive?" A long pause. "No." "Did you ever raise these concerns with your mother?" Teresa's jaw moved slightly. "No," she said. "So these concerns about your father's mental capacity arose after his death." It was not a question. "Yes," Teresa said. "Thank you. Nothing further." The judge ruled that afternoon. The petition was denied. Arthur's estate remained exactly as filed, wholly in my name, exactly as he had intended. The judge noted in his brief remarks that the evidence of Arthur's mental capacity was thorough, consistent, and credible, and that the petition had been unsupported by medical evidence and compromised by the timing and manner of its filing. Janet shook my hand in the corridor, firm and brief. I thanked her. Then I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and let myself exhale. A long, slow breath that felt like it had been waiting months. The July afternoon outside was ordinary. Pigeons on the courthouse steps. A man with a coffee and a phone. The world proceeding as though verdicts happened every day, which of course they do. Arthur would have found that reassuring. He had a deep respect for things that simply continued. I drove home. The consequences settled in over the following weeks in pieces, each one quieter than what had preceded it. Marcus's emails had not been introduced as criminal evidence because no crime had technically been committed. Aggressive strategy in a civil estate dispute is not illegal, but they were now part of a public court record. They existed. They were findable. The soft mark, in his own words, in a document that didn't care how he had intended it. Marcus worked as a senior broker with a commercial real estate firm in Cambridge. Two of the partners at that firm, it later emerged, had professional contacts who had followed the case. Real estate is a field that runs on reputation and trust, and the picture those emails painted of how Marcus thought about vulnerable people was not a picture that aged well. By August, his standing at the firm had changed in ways that were difficult to attribute directly to the case, but impossible to separate from it. By November, he had quietly left. I heard this from Kathleen, who heard it from someone else. I received it the way I had learned to receive everything connected to Marcus, with sadness rather than satisfaction. I had never wanted him destroyed. I had wanted only what Arthur had left me. That those two things turned out to be connected was his doing and not mine. Teresa called me once, 3 weeks after the hearing. It was the hardest phone call of everything that had happened, including the calls in which she had threatened me. She was not combative. She was something worse. She was quiet in the particular way of someone who has lost the scaffolding that was holding their life in a particular shape and is now sitting in the rubble of what's underneath. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't understood what she was doing, that she had let someone else decide what mattered to her, and that she knew it wasn't an excuse. She said she had been thinking about her father, not about his money, but about who he actually was. The man who had made butter tart squares for every school bake sale. The man who had built her daughter a crib with his own hands. She said she missed him in a way that she hadn't let herself feel, because she had been so busy with other things. I listened without interrupting. I have a mother's patience, the kind that can hold a silence without filling it. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. Her voice cracked slightly on the word okay, and I heard in it, just for a moment, something that sounded like my girl. The one who had written thank you notes without being asked. "Not right now," I said, "but I haven't given up on you. Do you understand what I mean by that?" A long pause. "I think so," she said. "Then give it time. And please talk to someone, not a mediator, not Marcus's contacts, someone who will be honest with you about what happened and what you want your life to look like now." She said she would. She said it quietly, without the managed quality her voice had carried for years. Whether she followed through was her own matter. I had said what was mine to say. I was her mother. I was not her therapist. Those are not the same thing, even when they blur. Paige flew in from Vancouver in September. We had dinner at a restaurant on Wyndham Street and talked for 3 hours. She was easy to be with, the kind of young person who listens with their whole attention. She said her father was not doing well, and that she was sad about it, but not surprised. She said she was glad she had stayed in touch with me. I told her I was glad too. I meant it without qualification. The Hamilton property had its first full year under professional management by October. The rental income was modest but consistent. Beverly Tran had the investment accounts organized and well-positioned before summer ended. Every document filed, every account settled, every legal matter closed. Arthur's estate was fully mine, not in any grasping sense, in the sense that it was exactly where he had placed it, with exactly the care and intention of a man who had spent 9 years making sure it would be safe. Janet sent a final invoice, which was reasonable, and a brief note on her firm letterhead. Arthur left things in order. So did you. I put the note in the tin box. It seemed right. That autumn I had the shed re-sided in cedar, which Arthur had always wanted to do, but kept putting off. I kept his workbench exactly as it was, tools hanging in their outlines on the pegboard, coffee cans sorted by fastener size. I started spending time out there in the mornings with my tea, just sitting in the smell of sawdust and old wood, thinking. I took a road trip to Prince Edward Island with Kathleen in September, something we had been talking about for 10 years. We drove across on the Confederation Bridge on a bright afternoon, and I genuinely felt, something I had been afraid I might not feel again. Simple pleasure. The uncomplicated kind, the road ahead and the light on the water, and nowhere in particular to be. I began a quilting group at the community center, which I had been putting off joining for years because Arthur and I were always busy with something. I was not particularly skilled. I went every Thursday anyway. Paige turned 28 in November. I sent her a card and the small check and a note that said she could use it for anything she wanted, no reporting required. She called to thank me and stayed on the phone for 40 minutes. It was one of the better 40 minutes of the year. By December, Teresa's calls were becoming, slowly and unevenly, more like themselves. She called to tell me about her daughter's school concert. She called on Arthur's birthday to say she had been thinking about him. She did not ask for anything. She was not performing warmth. She was, I thought, simply trying. Rebuilding is not an event. It is a long series of ordinary Tuesday phone calls that accumulate slowly into something resembling what was lost, which is never quite the same thing, but can still be worth having. On Christmas Eve, I sat in Arthur's shed with a mug of tea and took the investment notebook out of the tin box where I had put it for safekeeping. I traced the first entry with my finger. January 14th, 2009. The year Marcus had first tried to borrow from us. I thought about a man who had carried something invisible for 9 years alone, trusting that his wife would know what to do with it when the time came. I thought about the photograph at Lake Louise. You always knew what mattered. Trust that. He had been right about me. I intended to go on being worth that. I closed the notebook, finished my tea, and went inside to put the kettle on. For when my grandchildren arrived in the morning, with their noise and their beautiful, uncomplicated energy, tracking snow across the kitchen floor, asking what was for breakfast before their coats were even off. My life was different than it had been. In the ways that mattered, it was not smaller at all. I still think about that moment in the shed, sawdust on my sleeves, cold coming through the wall, a tin box wrapped in Arthur's flannel shirt sitting in my hands. I didn't know yet what was in it. I only knew, in the way you sometimes know things before you understand them, that my life was about to ask something of me. What it asked, in the end, was whether I was the person Arthur had believed I was for 39 years. I have thought a lot about cause and consequence since all of this settled. Not in any mystical sense, just in the plain and honest sense that how we treat people tends to come back to us, one way or another, with a patience that outlasts whatever story we've told ourselves to justify our choices. Marcus had spent years keeping careful ledgers of what he was owed. He had written down, in his own words, what he thought of me. And those words found their way into a court record and then into the world, exactly as his own actions had written them. No one arranged that. It arranged itself. I don't say that with any pleasure. I say it because it's true, and because I think the truth of it is worth sitting with. What carried me through wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger would have been easier in some ways, cleaner, something to burn off. What I had instead was something quieter, something Arthur had left me, along with the key and the notebook and the photograph, at Lake Louise, a clear sense of what was right, a knowledge, bone deep, of what he had intended and what I owed it to him to do. That kind of clarity is not a feeling. It's a choice you make again every morning, especially on the mornings when you're frightened. I was frightened. I was also organized. I called Janet. I documented everything. I took no action in haste and no decision out of emotion. Arthur had spent 9 years being methodical on my behalf, and the least I could do was be methodical in return. Intelligence, in the end, is not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about knowing when to be still, when to move, and who to trust. Janet, Beverly, Maureen, Ruth, Kathleen. I had built a life with real people in it, and I let them help me. And Teresa. I think about her too, more than I probably should. She lost her father and then spent months being guided away from grief and toward strategy by someone who had always treated love as a transaction. That is its own kind of harm, the slow kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself. I don't know yet what she and I will be to each other in the years ahead. I know I haven't closed that door. Courage, I've decided, isn't only what you do when someone threatens you. It's also what you do when someone has hurt you and you choose to leave a way back open anyway, not from weakness, but from a considered decision that some things are worth the risk of being hurt again. Arthur knew I was that kind of person. He said so in his way, in that photograph. You always knew what mattered. I carry that with me now, the same way I carry the tin box, which sits on the shelf in the shed beside his level and his measuring tape. Some mornings I go out there with my tea and just stand in that space and feel grateful for a man who was never better at saying things than he was at doing them. That was enough. It was more than enough.